It's Thursday, the 16th of September 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. The OECD provides a critique of the local economy and calls for a review of the Reserve Bank for missing economic forecasts. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, the vaccine rollout czar warns hitting 80% will be tough. Consumers and business upbeat about the economy. And I'll tell you about an Australian company bigger than Telstra, bigger than Woolworths, that most people haven't heard of. Then stay listening for my chat about the boom in non-fungible tokens. It's well worth a listen. But first, here's a brief look at markets. Wall Street was higher overnight as confidence returned among investors. In early afternoon trading, the S&P 500 was up 0.8%, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 0.7% higher, and the Nasdaq was 0.6% stronger. European markets were weaker, with the Stoxx Europe 600 off 0.7%, while London's FTSE was down 0.3%. The S&P ASX 200 finished down 0.3% yesterday to close at 7,417 points, led lower by energy and utility stocks. The healthcare and technology indices outperformed. The iron ore miners did poorly on the back of lower prices for the commodity. BHP ended the session down 3.5%, Rio Tinto was off nearly 2%, and Fortescue Metals was 1.4% lower. AGL Energy was the worst performer among the top 200, down 7.4%. The generator and retailer of electricity and gas has very few friends at the moment, particularly since it's among the country's largest polluters. Its share price is off 35% since late June. Oil prices are up sharply overnight, with Brent crude back above $75 a barrel. The price of gold dropped back below $1,800 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is trading at 73.3 US cents. Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is open to an independent review of the Reserve Bank of Australia, following calls from the OECD to take an independent look at why the central bank continually missed hitting its economic forecasts. The OECD said it was an appropriate time to review the central bank, given the institutional and structural changes that have occurred in the Australian economy as a result of the pandemic and the unconventional policy instruments the RBA has employed. Mr. Frydenberg said the bank and the federal government had worked well together, but there's always a need to look at what lessons could be learnt. The OECD report on Australia, the first in 3 years, had plenty in it. It urged the big banks to look beyond residential property when considering security for small businesses. If they did, access to capital for innovative companies would be improved. And it said the government and the prudential regulator should do more to encourage small business lending. The group forecast the economic growth rate to be 4% this calendar year and 3.3% next year, saying the recovery in the Australian economy would be more gradual than previously. The OECD also pointed out that while Australia was vulnerable to climate change, it was also uniquely placed to benefit economically from the green transition due to its large and windy landmass, plentiful sunshine, and ocean access. It also highlighted innovation in carbon abatement technologies. The OECD, which is run by former Federal Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, said Australia needed a coherent national strategy that defines clear goals and policies to move to net zero, and the finance sector should play a role achieving these aims. Finally, the OECD called for international borders to be reopened as soon as possible. The benefit of the OECD report is you get an outsider's view of the local economy, and the message is that things are going okay, but COVID risks remain. Doing something about climate change and boosting activity among small businesses is critical to long-term prosperity. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, there were plenty of economic data out over the past 24 hours from around the globe. The statistics out of China suggested the world's second largest economy slowed during August. Inflation in the United Kingdom rose more than expected, and industrial output in Europe was up. Overnight, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development said global growth this year was likely to hit 5.3%, the fastest pace in 50 years, before slowing to 3.6% next year. The UN forecast the total economic loss due to COVID at $13 trillion. The effectiveness of the Pfizer jab wanes after 6 to 8 months, according to data released overnight. Vaccine efficacy fell about 6% every 2 months after the second jab, based on data from the US and Israel. A booster jab then restores the effectiveness of the inoculation. Pfizer is going before the Food and Drug Administration in the US tomorrow to argue the need for a third shot. US President Joe Biden suggested holding a face-to-face summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping during a phone call last week, but it fell on deaf ears, according to a report in the Financial Times. President Xi apparently insisted that Washington take a less strident tone towards Beijing. It doesn't look like there's going to be much of a détente in that relationship for a while. And Apple yesterday launched 4 new iPhone 13 models, a new iPad, a new iPad mini, and a new Apple Watch. Prices for the iPhone 13 models are the same as the iPhone 12 models. That's the good news. According to the global tech giant, the new smartphones have faster processors and better graphics capability, an improved camera system, longer battery life, and faster image processing. I'll have to take their word for it. Locally, 80% of New South Welshmen have received at least one vaccine jab, an achievement welcomed by Premier Gladys Berejiklian, who said the nighttime curfew in 12 Sydney hotspots will end today. But the general in charge of the national rollout, JJ Fruin, warned that achieving an 80% full vaccination rate nationally might not happen this year. The daily rate of doses has slipped over the past week to below 300,000, and General Fruin said international experience showed that getting from 70% to 80% was hard work. New South Wales reported 1,259 cases and 12 deaths yesterday. Ms Berejiklian said only when New South Wales hit a full vaccination rate of 70% would hairdressers, pubs and gyms be allowed to reopen. Restrictions will be substantially eased once 80% is achieved, including international travel. Victoria is expected to hit its 70% single-dose vaccination target today. It was about the only good news out of the state. There were 423 new cases announced. Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton cautioned that the outbreak hadn't peaked and the state could end up with 1,000 cases a day. And the regional city of Ballarat went into lockdown for at least 7 days. At least Shepparton's lockdown ended. In the ACT, 13 new cases were reported. The good news was that the number of people in hospital has dropped to 7, with 1 person in intensive care. 3/4 of the Territory residents have now had 1 jab. Nationally, 69% of people have had 1 jab and 43% are fully inoculated. Both business and consumer confidence are holding up remarkably well, and while lower than their peaks earlier this year, they are well above the levels hit during lockdowns in 2020. The Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Survey rose 2% to 106.2 points this month. Confidence improved across the board, particularly around future conditions. Westpac Chief Economist Bill Evans said the resilience of consumers was truly remarkable given the lockdowns. The National Australia Bank August Business Survey showed confidence up 2 points to -5 and conditions up 4 points to +14. Again, the rises were broad-based. It seems consumers and businesses are more upbeat about the vaccination rollout and economic prospects when New South Wales, Victoria and ACT come out of lockdown. And that's good for the national economy as we head towards the end of the year. The value of Canva, the visual communication platform, has hit $55 billion. If it was listed on the ASX, it would be a top 10 company, bigger than Fortescue, Woolworths and Telstra. Canva raised $200 million yesterday by selling new shares to investors, providing the valuation. Canva was started by married couple Melanie Perkins and Cliff Obrecht, and they own 30% of the business. That means they're worth about $16.5 billion. Mr. Obrecht yesterday said they plan to give away their fortune to make the world a better place. Canva's valuation has more than doubled since April. The Morrison government is set to tear up the troubled $90 billion contract with French shipbuilder Naval Group and partner with the United States and the United Kingdom to switch to an American-made nuclear-powered submarine, according to a report in the Financial Review this morning. Naval was supposed to build 12 submarines in Adelaide under a deal signed in 2015, but the program has been plagued with cost blowouts, design changes and local industry involvement. Terminating the contract will cost taxpayers up to $400 million. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is taking a close look at who paid Industry Minister Christian Porter's legal bills in his defamation case against the ABC. Mr. Porter accepted money from a blind trust, meaning it could have come from anywhere, to help fund his estimated $1 million in costs. Labor claims it's a breach of ministerial standards, and former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull called it a shocking affront to transparency. Media reports this morning suggest Mr Porter could be forced to step down from the front bench. Qantas yesterday scheduled its first international flights for December 18. Maybe it won't turn out that way, but the fact that the airline has done it provides some hope. Qantas will fly Sydney-London, Melbourne-London, Sydney-Los Angeles, Sydney-Vancouver, Sydney-Singapore and Melbourne-Singapore. Okay, you probably didn't need all that information, but I just wanted to say it. 2 KPMG partners have been forced to leave the firm, 16 partners have lost remuneration, and the business will be fined $615,000 by regulators over widespread cheating on internal tests, according to media reports. About 1,100 people across the business have been disciplined after a 15-month investigation found answer sharing on online multiple choice tests in the 4 years to 2020. Pilbara Minerals has reported strong participation in its lithium digital auction, held via its battery material exchange on Tuesday night. It's the second such auction held by the group, and the bidding is used to offload unallocated tonnes of concentrate. Pilbara intends to pick the highest bid of $2,240 a metric tonne for its 8,000 metric tonne cargo. The successful bidder now enters into a sales contract with Pilbara, and ship loading is expected in November. Pilbara's share price jumped 8.4% yesterday. And James Packer is putting his super yacht, IJE, up for sale, hoping to get $280 million for the 2-year-old vessel. According to a report in the Australian newspaper, Packer spent much of the past 2 years on the yacht, and it was last seen heading to San Remo in Italy. The 108-metre vessel accommodates 22 guests in 11 suites, as well as a crew of 28. It has a private owner's deck, a gym, a cinema, and apparently a nightclub. IJE was named for Mr. Packer's 3 children, Indigo, Jackson and Manuel. Maybe the Canva couple might like to buy it. Up next is our daily interview, and if you've ever wondered what on earth a non-fungible token is, well, you're not alone. But what started as a bit of a novelty in the crypto space is rapidly becoming big business, and an Australian company is at the forefront of it all. I'm talking to Robbie Ferguson, the co-founder of Immutable, about the $82 million they've just raised to take their technology mainstream. And don't worry, I get Robbie to explain it all to me in layman's terms. So next time you hear a story about an NFT or a tweet or an artwork selling for a ridiculous sum, you'll understand every word. Hopefully. I'll guarantee you'll learn something today at least. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. It's Thursday, the 16th of September, 2021. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.